This is the Africa Housing Podcast. We explore real estate, entrepreneurship, innovation, and the inspiring stories that are shaping the future of Africa. Let's dive in.
Well, welcome back to the Africa Housing Podcast. I'm really excited today to have two guests who are both calling in from Ghana. Hanna Atiase is the force behind eWells Realty and is going to share with us the perspective of someone who has been in the diaspora, come back to Ghana, completely restructured the real estate industry there, or trying to completely restructure it, and having a big impact in that space. Really excited to have Hanna here. And Hanna, I'll ask you to give a little bit more of your background in a moment. And then Marisa Deku is here as well, who brings the perspective of someone who was not from Ghana at all, but has moved there, married into a Ghanaian family, and is working with Jobomax, selling homes in Ghana now, both to the diaspora and to local residents. And so we're going to talk about their perspectives on the market, what opportunities there are for people who have an interest in real estate in Ghana, either as a place to retire, as a place to invest for rental income, or any variety of reasons. So, without further ado, just briefly before I dive into the topical questions, Hanna, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in this space, and why you're talking to us today?
Great. Well, once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, Bob. I appreciate it. And good to see you, Marisa, as well. So I think my real estate journey started after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. That got me started in real estate. And then I started taking real estate courses, going to business seminars, anything real estate related, to learn as much as possible. And that was when I was in the US. So I started my journey there. And then after relocating to Ghana, I actually worked for a bank that was financing mortgages. At that time, it was called Ghana Home Loans. So I actually worked there for a while, built the sales and marketing division for them. And then after that, started doing consultancy for real estate developers. My journey started just from reading that incredible book. And here we are today.
Well, that's a great story. I hope you get some sort of commission for all the book sales that were going to happen after this podcast. I'm sure Guy Kawasaki's paying attention.
I hope so.
That's good stuff. Well, thanks for that. It's interesting you talk about your background on the financing side of this puzzle, because I think Marisa's got some background there as well, and I think that's one theme that we're going to touch on here is how critical that financing piece is, and what a difference that can make in actually being able to get a project executed, and what the challenges are in getting financing in this market. But we'll get there. Marisa, why don't you give us a little bit about you?
Yes. Thanks again for having me. So for me, I worked in banking and lending for years before I came to the continent, originally as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I've been on the continent. I lived in the north, I've lived in the south, and then I've ended up, as Bob said, now my future is Ghana. So I am here and happily being a part of, bridging the gap in this new sector, in the real estate sector, bringing people back home to Ghana. So here we are.
That's great. Well, thank you both for being here. I am going to jump in and ask some questions. And I do have a list of questions, although I think the important thing is to get your perspective. So I'm expecting that some of these questions will lead us in directions that I haven't anticipated, and that's fine, because you both have interesting things to say, and I think people are going to want to hear more what you have to say than what questions I think are important. But we'll start with Hanna. Give me your take on why Ghana has become such an attractive destination for the diaspora. And I'm talking not just recent diaspora, but historic diaspora as well. Why is it that so many people are looking at Ghana now and choosing to invest there? What was it? I mean, is it the same thing that drew you back from your from the time that you spent outside of Ghana, what do you see being the thing that's giving people a sense that there's a real opportunity here?
Yeah, so I believe it's because Ghana offers something very unique, right? We have a very unique market where, first, let's talk about the emotional piece, right? A lot of people are drawn here because of the transatlantic slavery, being able to come back and reconnect to their roots. So, it talks about the door of no return. But the fact that people are able to return on behalf of their ancestors, and then they're coming and they're repossessing the land that their ancestors were taken from. So there's that emotional connection, and the best way to reconnect is through homeownership. And so there's that piece. And then you have the political stability, the economic stability. So if you look at Ghana holistically, not only do you have the emotional piece, you have the economic piece, you have the political piece. So it's very well rounded for people who want to relocate and essentially restart their lives. So I think that's what's attracting people. And of course, we are in a very friendly nation. People feel the warmth, the hospitality of the people. And, we have great tourist sites as well. So I think this, coupled with everything else that I mentioned, is what is really drawing people back to Ghana.
That's great. I think it's absolutely true. And Hanna, as you know, Jobomax is active in 4 countries on the continent, not all of which are as stable as Ghana. Not all of which have they're all different, but right. But it's interesting. We I talk to people about what we do sometimes, and often I'll get this question: well, is it stable? Like, what's the political environment like? And these days, I'm tempted to say, well, compared to what? Compared to the United States? Yeah, because but certainly, Ghana is one of those places that has us. I don't want to overplay it, but it is one of those places that for me feels like there's a certain magic when you land there. You feel that there's this energy and this warmth that other places have too, but there's something special about Ghana.
I totally agree with you on that, because you cannot use any particular nation as a benchmark to determine whether this nation measures to that standard or not. It is an individual decision. And one of I think the things I hear across board for those who come to Ghana is, as soon as they get off the plane and their feet touch the ground, there's an overwhelming sense of peace. And I hear that consistently. And I think that's also another key factor. Yeah. That's great.
Well, Marisa, your story's a little different. You came not as a returning diasporan, but as somebody that married into the community there and is now working in the real estate space. I'm curious to hear what has been both, what's been familiar to you about how the housing market works in Ghana, and what's surprised you, what's been, different from what you might have expected. Is there something about your sort of outsider status that makes it possible for you to see things that may not be evident to people that sort of have been swimming in that water since they were born?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question. I think, as mentioned, I have been out here for a long time. So I remember first coming here, seeing the iron rods sticking out of the roofs of homes, and I didn't quite get it at first. And having a background in, coming from obviously the US, but also in finance, in banking, everything is card. So you come into this cash culture, which was normal. But then I realized the cash culture, it also extended into homes, and everything that you just take for granted. And that's what those iron rods were. People built as they got money, as they got cash. So when I came to Ghana, I saw that, but very quickly living, in the major city, with a lot of consumerism around, billboards everywhere. I noticed most of the billboards were for homes and apartments and condos and townhomes and banks and mortgages. And so I was like, okay, there are options here outside of what I've already experienced. And then I think from the outside was, yeah, again, you take it for granted. And even myself, I thought that there was no other option. And then I started to realize, no, there are, the world is around me is telling me that people can live, can afford a home, through financing options. It's not just cash only. There is a way. And then now that I've worked in the sector with Jobomax in particular, I've realized, okay, yes, there's a way locally, and there is a way now with platforms such as Jobomax where people from outside can also get financing. So it's refreshing to know that it's possible. It's possible for anyone. The accessibility is there. What is here on the ground sometimes doesn't always match what we have, from an outside perspective, but it's available. And as long as you find the resources and, you work and you do your research, you can make it happen. You don't need the cash up front. Yeah.
No, that's great. It's always interesting to land somewhere new and sort of recognize some things that work similarly to what you expect, and then see how some things are completely different. And Ghana, of all the places that we work, Ghana has the most advanced mortgage market, and yet still, it's a tiny market compared to what the role that mortgages play in other parts of the world. I mean, I want to say my colleague John Block is fun. He can cite statistics better than I can, but I want to say that, in the U.S. mortgage market relative to GDP may be something like 50 to 70%. And even in a market like Ghana, you're talking about low single digit percentages. It's a really small part of the market that makes a difference. I mean, you can sort of track the impact on the housing deficit by what kind of financing becomes available. We've talked about why Ghana is like everybody should visit Ghana, right? Like that feeling of landing and the warmth of the welcome there is something I feel like everybody should experience. It's one thing to come and visit and appreciate the culture and then go home and have fond memories. It's another thing to say, this is not just a tourist destination. This is an investment destination, and this is a place where I'm going to allocate my resources and potentially, spend a lot of my time in the long run. Marisa, I'm curious for your take on what do you see as the actually, like both of you, I'm curious for your answer on this. What is it that's motivating buyers in this market? How much of it is a pure sort of real estate investment? I want to have rental income. I want to see price appreciation. How much of it is people looking for, thinking ahead to a retirement location? How much of it is about legacy and having something to leave behind, for your children? What are the motivations, and then also where do you see most of the people coming from, or what's the mix of places where people come from when they want to relocate? I'll start. I'll point that at you, Marisa, but I'm curious for what Hanna has to say as well.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think it's top of the list is investment, but I think that also gets tied in with relocation and legacy, right? Almost everyone I'm talking to is wanting to come home, wanting that legacy, because a lot of my market I talk to are Caribbeans and African Americans, and a lot of them want to come back home, and they want to do it in a way that that they're investing and they're looking at a future here. So and also so it's an investment, but it's also access to come back home. And I think with Ghana is where a lot of people trace their roots particularly. So you've got, like she said, that emotional connection. They're coming back home literally, but also Ghana is booming. Accra is booming. So when you're coming to invest, hey, look, honestly speaking, I feel like at this point, especially if you get in early, the asset itself will return investments, regardless of rental income and these things. So Ghana has quite an inviting market. It's an inviting country. Much as she said, it's very true and more, but also the market's very inviting as well. And, becoming more accessible for diasporans, not only Ghanaians that have moved out and coming back home, but, retiring or coming back home after living abroad, but a lot of people that are looking to come back home, historic diasporans. So
No, that's great. Yeah, it is a dynamic country and culture and economy, a young country, a rapidly growing country, but they're not making any more land, are they? It's so, yeah. Well, Hanna, any other context to add on that question about diaspora motivations and where people are coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Marisa touched on everything, but just to piggyback a bit off of what she said, Ghana is seen as the gateway to Africa. So once you come to Africa, the rest of the continent is accessible, particularly, of course, West Africa, right? And so that in itself is something that drives investors, not just investors in real estate, but investors in agriculture and technology and that sort of thing, because they can easily capture the West African market. And then also the numbers don't lie. Investors look at numbers. Ghana's returns in real estate are incredible. I mean, when you look at statistics, Ghana has the highest annual rental yields in the entire continent, followed by Tanzania. I mean, when you look at the returns, you're looking at double digits. So investors who are keen on return on their investment, they know that this is a market where they can achieve that. And particularly now, which we're all excited about in the real estate market, with the regulatory framework that is being put in place, because that was one of the hesitations for investors. But now that they see that that is active, people are being licensed, the government is taking a stance, you have the FIC getting involved. This is increasing, confidence, investor confidence. And so now people are saying, we had an interest, our appetites were wet, but now we're diving in simply because of the good governance we're seeing, the regulatory framework we're seeing, and the numbers that we're seeing as well. So absolutely. And in terms of our clientele base, majority of people who invest through Ewell's Realty and Consultancy are from the United States. And then we get quite a number of people from the UK as well. We do get a handful of people from Asia, but particularly the United States and Europe, either the UK or Germany. So that's what we're seeing now. And yeah, I think the numbers are speaking loudly.
Yeah. No, that's great.
One thing, real quick, I wanted to add in another thing, and you mentioned it, Hanna. Globally, you have access to buy here. And I think in other parts of the continent, usually you have to partner with someone that's from there. But in Ghana, you can own a home here as a foreigner as well. And there's also movements of diasporans acquiring citizenship. So that also is another level of accessibility that's more inviting in Ghana in particularly.
Absolutely, Marisa. And just to add to what you said, earlier this year, they did give honorary citizenships to, I believe, about 270 something individuals, but over 4,000 people applied. That in itself shows you the interest, right? The year before that, over 520 people received their citizenship. And, I was in the room as people received their citizenship, and there was such a sense of fulfillment, a sense of, fulfilling a promise to their ancestors, essentially, that, hey, I was able to come back, and not only was I able to come back, but I am restoring what was lost. I'm getting that citizenship now, and I'm able to pass that, on to my children and their children's children. So absolutely, the interest is there because of what the government, the nation is doing to make people feel as comfortable as possible.
That's great to hear. It is so encouraging to me to see governments in this part of the world making tangible changes to address what has been behind the problems in the housing market. Like you hear, I can't think of a single government on the continent that doesn't acknowledge that they have a housing deficit, that doesn't acknowledge that there's a problem. And yet making the connection from there's a problem to here's the ways that we're part of the problem, whether there are regulatory issues that create hurdles for the buyers or regulatory issues that create hurdles for the developers. So much of the solution here is just finding a way for the government to either get out of the way or put incentives in place that will make it a viable business proposition for people to come in and work in the market. And I think Ghana has certainly been a leader on a lot of that stuff. So I'm going to segue a little bit. And, we're talking about numbers and how attractive the investment opportunity is and what kinds of returns people can anticipate. And it's easy to think about those when your mind is in that space, it's easy to start thinking very transactionally and say, oh, I'm just going to put money in here and then I'm going to get X out. And it can be easy to forget about the fact that that all of this happens in relationship with people, and that getting a project done, finding someone that's going to build you the house that you're going to retire to, or the house that you're going to use for your rental income. There's a lot of relationship building there. In addition to there being a transaction that happens in that relationship. And for it all to work, there's got to be trust. And trust can be challenging because there are many people who have tried to build. And I'm talking about my experience of this is what I see in our diaspora buyers who typically, when they come to Jobomax, they have already tried to build something back home. And more of my experience is in Guinea. Ghana is a relatively new market for us, but I see this in Cameroon and Sierra Leone as well. People often come to us having already lost tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more than $100,000 after sending money to a friend or a relative, or even sometimes to a developer, a business. And then that money not turning into the product that they thought they were investing in, and that creates a real trust deficit that's layered on top of the housing deficit. And so I want to talk about trust in real estate, and I want to start with you, Hanna. What are the challenges that people face when they're trying to invest and they're not there, when they don't live there, when they live in the UK or the US? Why is that experience, historically anyhow, so fraught? What are some of the bad stories that you've heard or you've observed? And for people that are contemplating this, what do you actually need to see in order to be able to begin to develop the kind of trust that makes it make sense to take this kind of step?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fantastic question, right? Because it's one of the biggest pain points out there. But I would like to say, I don't think it's a trust issue per se, but it's a misplaced trust is how I'm going to frame it. Because I find that people tend to place their trust on people by their feelings about them, or their discernment about them, or their emotional tie to the country. But what we need to be looking at is, where are you placing your trust in terms of systems, in terms of processes? Based on my experience, whenever people come to eWells, I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. We had a gentleman who saw us on Instagram. He flew down from New Jersey, wanted to purchase land through us. And by the time he came, previously, he had tried this like 3 times. Usually after the second time, people give up, but he was still going strong. This was try number 4. And so he was like, people are getting scammed. He got scammed and that sort of thing. And I asked one simple question, and I said, what was your buying process? That's it. And if you interview people, I'm talking about my experience, 99% of the time, people don't understand that we have a buying process. So the lack of education, just like in the United States, there is a buying process. Just like in Europe, there is a buying process. There is a buying process in Ghana, but people tend to divert that process, because a lot of times they're looking at cutting costs, but they end up paying more, sometimes triple for that, right? So to answer your question, the trust thing should be placed in a system. If I asked you right now, Bob, Jobomax, what is the buying process to be able to purchase one of your properties? You would be able to lay that out for me, right? And that is what people should be asking. That is what people should be trusting, right? Not people per se, but systems. What is your system? What is your process?
That is so insightful. And, when people do ask that question to me, I tell them, well, the process started a few years ago when I went through a 60-point checklist before I bought the land that I'm going to build your house on, because I need to be able to, there is no title insurance. I need to, everything we do, we have to self-insure by having a really rigorous process and the systems in place to make sure that the land that we buy, and the title that we're eventually going to assign to someone who buys a house from us, that they're never going to have a problem with that title. That nobody's going to show up and say, "Oh, that belongs to me," or "Oh, the government's not going to show up and say, why'd you build a house in the middle of this area that has been planned for a highway for the past 20 years?" So, this stuff happens because people, skip steps in the process. It reminds me, actually, Marisa's going to laugh at me because I won't shut up about the podcast that I listen to. But there was one the other day with Brene Brown was talking about. I forget who she was quoting, but it was basically like people don't or systems don't rise to the level of the people in the organization. People fall to the level of the system,
Exactly.
and it is a real constraint. That we have to be really, really thoughtful about.
I want to add to that, if I may, Bob, because the other question you posed, the second half of that question was, is it an issue of how do we buy land if we are not in Ghana? I don't think it matters whether you are in Ghana or not. We are in a digital age. We have a lot of clients that purchase sight unseen, right? And as I mentioned before, you got to have the right system in place. And we're in a digital age now. There's live streaming, live, videos that we could do, video tours we could do with clients. They can have a representative on the ground that can view on their behalf. I mean, you don't have to physically be in the nation, right? It all boils back down to that system. What is the process to acquiring that? And interestingly, I was interviewing a developer on the Homeowner Show, and he had a particular process, just like you've outlined, Bob, on how they go about acquiring that land. They never buy directly from chiefs. They always buy, quote unquote, the secondary market when somebody else has purchased it, because then that person would have stayed on that land for a period of time, and they would have had to deal with all the, false claims and that sort of thing. So that is their pathway to acquisition. So I think buyers just have to ask questions, and, we always say buyers beware, but at the same time, if that the individual or the developer does not have a buying process, then that in itself is what we need to look out for, not necessarily who is the person. We're not doing a character assessment per se, but we're looking at the ability to be able to acquire, diligently, and to be able to deliver very well as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to look at it. Marisa, let's say you've found the right local partner who's got the good systems in place and people that you can trust, and you make a decision to invest and start building a home. Talk to me a little bit about what happens next, and like managing a construction project from afar, keeping track of what's going on, making sure that what you paid to be built is actually being built on a schedule that matches your expectations and to a level of quality that matches your expectations. What's that experience like?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think to start off, ask questions, find out that process, find out what you have access to as the buyer. And your point of contact, which would probably be someone like me, like a sales manager, what kind of access do you have to them? And when you ask the question, are they coming with an answer? Are they coming with solid evidence? Are they coming with, proof? Because again, it's a digital age. So once you know the access that you have, then let's go from there. So for example, in my role right now, if someone is interested in buying, they're usually going to do a site visit, and you're going to see a house. You're going to see something that we've built or something we're in the process of building, whether we've built it in Ghana or maybe in another market, for example. But you're going to see tangible evidence of who we are. Also, does that developer have some kind of testimonial from other people that have built with them? That's really crucial. And then again, what kind of access do you have to me as a salesperson or your agent? Am I available for you? And I think that's really key. Once you do make that decision and you're going forward, now you've got someone, I can always rely on you. You're always bringing me information. You're answering my questions. You're coming, you've built the relationship or the trust. And then ask what platforms, how can you see your build? And so, for example, with Jobomax, we have created our own technology platform where you get weekly updates from your build happening, videos, pictures, literally according to a time frame that you have set out in the contract, right? And so that right there is just, it's evidence, that the build is happening. From there, you can also, some companies have WhatsApp groups, communities, social media. You just make sure that you have access and you're not seeing like recycled information, information that's constantly changing and constantly up to date. Because things are actually in motion. So having access to the salesperson, I would say, is trusted access to someone there on the ground, whether you've been there or not. Even our client here in Ghana, he bought with us. He invested in Ghana, and he sees our updates, and that's like actual information. And he is just so proud to say, "Hey guys, he's from the U.S. Hey guys, I've bought in Africa from afar, and this is not my first time. This is my second and third." And it works. And he's trying to show people you can do it. He's very, very vocal and very, very, he's almost like committed in a way to prove to people, yeah, we can build back home, especially, to the diaspora. And so, making sure that, what access do you have to not only the developer, but also what are they doing and what are they going to do for you? What is your access point? The salesperson, WhatsApp community, social media, but also how are you going to follow your build? Make sure ask before you move forward. How am I going to keep up on my build? I want to see what's happening with my build. Yeah.
That's helpful. Thanks. And I don't know if you actually said the word, but a lot of what you're talking about is communication and the reliability of communication and knowing that you have a trusted partner to communicate with or a platform that facilitates that communication. And this is something that really comes up over and over and over again in our business, because our diaspora clients have expectations about how quickly somebody's going to respond. There's sort of call them international communication, professional communication standards, or whatever, whatever you want to call it. But if you say we're going to start the meeting at 11 o'clock, people expect you to start the meeting at 11 o'clock, and then there, other parts of the world where I went to a community event on Saturday that the flyer said started at 6 o'clock, and I went at 8 o'clock because that's when they told me. No, I went at 7:30. That's when they told me to show up, and then by 9 o'clock the room was starting to fill up, right? And so there's there are different sets of expectations, but in our interactions, the message that I'm often pushing to our team that interacts directly with clients is like, don't wait until you have what you think is the answer that they want to hear. Let them know that you're there, that you've heard their question. And if you have the answer, give them the answer. If you're working on the answer, tell them you're working on the answer. If you know the answer is an answer that they're not going to like, that's okay. They'd rather have an answer than silence. And I had this experience just last week with one of our clients who approached me about something he wanted to do. My answer was no. But I gave him that answer in about 3 minutes. And his message back to me, and we were just sending each other voice notes on WhatsApp, and he just said, "Thank you for getting back to me." Like that was the first feeling that he had was he appreciated that I had heard his question and given him an answer. Hanna, I'm curious to hear your take on that aspect of this process, how that factors into the experience for buyers and helping build trust and making them feel comfortable.
You're taking me back to my training days with the team, the early training days, because it's one of the things that I realized that, you've got to renew the mindset before the skill set, right? And you got to look at the culture and the whole context of that. And as a whole, Ghanaians are very reserved. They don't like confrontation. They don't like to hurt your feelings. So if the response is something that's not going to be pleasant for the clients, they hold off as long as possible because they don't want that confrontation, and so you've got to, train and build people up to understand that that's part of excellent customer service and customer experience, because, we want everybody to walk away saying, wow, what an experience with Ewell's Realty. So we had to train on customer response times. I mean, we have a response time from the minute an email comes in to inquiry for a listing and that sort of thing. But we had to train our staff on that, right? And I think that, we have to look at the culture. Right. It's a cultural thing. And once you understand the culture and where they're coming from, then you see their thought process. You're able to relate and you're able to give them a different perspective as to why this is not a confrontation, why this is not, hurting somebody's feelings. And if you don't have an answer, don't be intimidated by that. Don't feel bad about it, but respond and say, great question. I mean, stroke their ego a bit. Great question. I'll get back to you with that answer. So yeah, it was a great training curve for us.
It's so important. I am convinced that 90% of our sort of customer problems are not from giving them an answer they didn't want to hear. It's from making them wait to get an answer. Yeah. I
agree.
So important. Hanna, I know that you are in this market in a couple of different ways. You have a role kind of organizing the industry and trying to put some structure in place that will give everyone a sort of common set of systems that they can expect to work with, regardless of which developer they're working with. You have sort of an agency side of the business where you're marketing projects that other people are doing. You do some building for yourself. I'm curious when you're advising people and thinking about connecting potential buyers to other developers that are working in the region or working in Ghana, how do you vet other developers before you recommend them to one of your clients? Because you've got, you want their trust in you to be well placed, and obviously you don't want to send them to someone who's gonna rupture that trust. What are you looking for, and why did Jobomax clear the hurdle? How did we get into the mix with you?
Yeah, awesome. Because I talked about having the right system in place. So all our real estate brokers in the company know that we have a system. And the first thing we do is we have what we call a developer's checklist. Actually, we have a developer's checklist, a private seller's checklist, and the landlord's checklist. So for Jobomax, for example, we have a developer's checklist. There are a list of things that is the criteria, the bare minimum for us to be able to market your property. We check on things like the title documents, right? Making sure you have the indenture. We scrutinize the site plan, making sure that you have a licensed surveyor who did it. There's a signature on there, the stamp. I mean, we look at these things. We look at the indenture or the title documents. We look at the lease terms and that sort of thing. And then, how long we look at a proven track record. Is there a proven track record, right? Your proven track record may be in a different country. It may be in Ghana or, wherever else. But we look at that. We have developers who are coming into the market as a new developer, but we want to look at their proven track record. We want to see client testimonials. How was their experience working with that developer? Because ultimately, their experience is going to be a mirror of our client experiences as well. So we do look at that. We look at, is this a registered business? Are they legally able to do business in this country? Do they have an office location, right? We like to go to their office. We like to know that if there's going to be an issue, we can find them. Where would they be, right? So we have a list of things on there. We look at their financial capacity. They do have to give us a statement. How are you going to finance this project? And then we have an escrow system. Are you willing to use our escrow services? Because we're the only real estate brokerage that has this in Ghana. And it's very crucial because this allows us essentially, alongside with the clients, partnering with them to mitigate the risk as much as possible. Because once the funds are sent to the developer, that's it. We cannot manage how you manage the business or how you mismanage funds or allocate or misallocate your inventory and that sort of thing. So all the preliminary due diligence that we do have that checklist, and you must meet that criteria. So we verify and we vet the developers before we start marketing it. So we've had to turn, developers down just simply because they don't have a proven track record, right? Or they were going to use clients' funds to build, and they don't have any sort of safety net in case the client defaults or the client wants a refund and that sort of thing. There's no even insurance bond or performance bond. And you mentioned earlier, there's no title insurance, but I'll give you a little secret, Bob. There'll be title insurance very soon.
I'm excited to hear about that because I have been telling people for a decade that if you want to create a really interesting business, get into title insurance in this part of the world.
I agree. I totally agree. I mean, our real estate brokers have indemnity insurance that they carry as well, which is similar to the errors and omissions insurance in the US, right? So, so those are the steps we take. And then the developer has to give construction updates. Do you have a system in place or some sort of method? I mean, we still do it for our clients. We would be coming to the site, taking pictures, videos for our clients, but we expect you as a developer, and so Jobomax ticked all these boxes. And so that's why we are more than honored to be able to market Jobomax's properties. Yeah.
Well, we're excited to be working with you. I am going to transition now to talk about what for me often feels like the hardest piece of what we do. I go back and forth. Sometimes I feel like sales is the hardest. Sometimes I feel like financing is the hardest. But we're going to talk about financing. And this is something both of you have background in, both in Ghana and outside of Ghana. And I'll start with you, Hanna. Just talk about what are the financing options that are available to diaspora home buyers, and to the extent that there are differences depending on whether you are recent diaspora that has citizenship or historic diaspora that has citizenship or historic diaspora that doesn't have citizenship, or just a random guy like me that's interested in investing in Ghana. What options are really available? What are they facing in terms of trying to work with local banks on what are the rates that they could expect and the terms, collateral demands, other sorts of restrictions? And what's the gap between what you might see on the billboard about what's available and what actually happens when you go in and apply for that financing? And Ghana's a newer market for us, so I don't know it as deeply as I do some of the other markets. But we've been talking to some people that have a big project in Kumasi that we may help them on. And one of the challenges they've faced is that they put this project together with a bank partnership, with the understanding that the bank would be providing financing on certain terms for their buyers, and they keep bringing buyers to the bank, and they keep not quite getting approved. So it's like the deal is there on paper, but when the rubber hits the road to actually get that financing done, there seems to always be a little hiccup. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on what's possible, and then how do you close the gap between what's theoretically possible and actually getting something done on buyer financing in this market.
Yeah. So I think the first thing, even pre-financing, citizenship versus non-citizenship is the lease term, right? As a Ghanaian citizen, you can get a property up to a 99-year lease. So we don't have freehold like in the States and, other parts of the world, but we have leasehold. So as a foreigner, you can get up to 50 years. But the question people always ask is, well, what if I'm married to a Ghanaian, but you still get the foreigner leasehold if you're married to a Ghanaian, unless he gets the property in his name by himself, even though they're jointly married, right? So now in terms of financing, there are a couple of things that are different. And that's why now banks have what you call a diaspora mortgage, which is different to just the conventional mortgage, right? So the diaspora mortgage, some of the differences there, which for me was very shocking, first of all, because I worked at lendingtree.com. I was a loan officer in various states, and age discrimination was non-existent. You could call at age 85 and get a 30-year mortgage and nobody would blink, right? But in Ghana, there is a cutoff age, and that's age 60. And so if you are 55 years old, you can only get a 5-year mortgage in Ghana. So I thought that was, very, very different. But again, look at the cultural aspect of it. And their explanation is that they don't want to burden you with a mortgage in your retirement age. You need to just enjoy your pension, enjoy your retirement without the burden of a mortgage. That is the explanation there. And then also the loan term. If you are a Ghanaian, you can get up to a 20-year mortgage. If you are not, you get up to a 15-year mortgage. And then also, you can only get a mortgage with a spouse or with a parent, but you cannot get a mortgage with a boyfriend, girlfriend, or with a sibling. Right. But in the United States, you could get a mortgage with a sibling, etc. But those were some of the restrictions, only with a spouse or only with a parent. And then even being able to get a mortgage, starting age, you have to be, I believe, at least 21, the drinking age in some countries to be able to get a mortgage in Ghana. So there are a few restrictions there. But the other thing as well is the down payment amount. There are no subsidies for down payment. You have to put down 20 to 30%. And the prepayment penalty, before it was non-existent because people started, we are in a cash-based economy. So people are scared of credit. And so people were paying off the mortgages very quickly. And so they introduced the prepay, 5 years, that sort of thing. However, what I think is just incredible is that the default rate is less than 3%. This shows you that you are in an environment where people don't want to take out loans. People don't like the idea of credit, and they love to just be able to make these outright payments. So these are some of the differences I noticed. And the debt to income ratio. Some places you could do 55% DTI, but in Ghana, they caution you. Point is around 35% income ratio.
It is an interesting puzzle to try to crack. Marisa, have you, when you talk to people who have been looking at trying to buy property in Ghana, and you talk them through what the financing options are with Jobomax, for example, what kind of reactions do you get? Is the type of financing that we offer something people that are just expect because that's what they think everybody does, or is it something that people are surprised to hear about in this context?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the client and the client's experience, their experience in Africa, if they've been here, they know a little bit. Are they experienced in the market in general, or are they just coming in? I think if they're just coming in, they kind of assume. But you have a lot of people that have already been in the market, already been searching, and they write it off right away. Like, well, no, I can't get financing. And it's like, well, what do you mean? Hold on. And then you open up the door and you tell them that, we have an in-house financing option that's US based and in USD. And that is when everything changes. Like, oh, really? Because, I tried. They all assume that, the only option is to finance locally. And especially if they don't live, even if they're Ghanaian and they don't live in Ghana, they haven't lived there in some time, it's harder to get a local mortgage. So I think it really depends on the client. Some expect it and some think that it's already not an option. So they're trying to save money. Or they're trying to find another way around it. And when it comes to people that are surprised, then we can get the conversation going and they really can see things happening and they can say, okay, let me get this going. Cause they kind of put it off, like, okay, this isn't something I can plan right now, but now I can start crunching numbers. I can make this work. And, others that really didn't know, it was an option, when you tell them, because they're interested, but they know about the cash based, but you tell them about the terms, they're ready and they want to go for it. And they have different expectations a little bit sometimes because they expect, things more familiar to the US, with these subsidies and these things that she spoke of. So sometimes you just have to talk them through about, well, we're building in West Africa. It's a different market, but let's talk about this long term, how you can still save money, even though it's not like the US where you've got these long extended mortgages. Some of the terms are different. But if you want to invest in Ghana or the continent, this is still going to save you money in the long run. This initial investment and these terms. Yeah.
Bob, if I may answer the question you asked initially when you said, what's the difference between what is on the billboard and then the reality, right? Something that comes to mind is the fact that when financiers look at your income in Ghana, they're looking at your net income. And people have this sort of, I guess, some places they look at your gross. In Ghana, they're going to look at your net. So if you look at your net income, it's going to significantly decrease, your income and raise the debt value. So your debt to income ratio may be a little bit higher. And then unfortunately, you may not qualify. That could be one of the things. And I think also the other thing is debt. People don't realize that if you are a foreigner and you're going to get a mortgage in Ghana, first of all, we do have a credit system in Ghana. Let me get that out the way because people think we don't, but we do. We do have a credit system in Ghana, so they will check your credit in Ghana if you are a local person. However, if you are a foreigner, they will check your credit overseas. So in the US, they're going to check your Experian, your Equifax, and your TransUnion, and they're going to look at your debt. They're going to look at, your lates, how many days late. They're going to look at bankruptcy. They're going to look at all those things to determine whether they're going to finance a property that's not necessarily going to be your primary residence. This may be your second home. It may be an investment property. And so if the rate that is advertised, it says starting at, there are several banks that start at 11%. Once they do a credit risk assessment and they see that your debt to income ratio is here, your net income is here, and that sort of thing, then they add the margin. So you may not walk away with the 11, but walk away with 12, 13, and then not qualify. And finally, let me say this: in the United States, if you have rental income, it is considered income, right? And that could be added to your actual income. It does not qualify as income, So there are a few things that, people have to be educated about to know that all these things will be assessed prior to determining whether you truly qualify or not.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I know in our work, our qualification process, and we have a system in place, and we follow checklists, and we look at a lot of stuff, but it becomes in some ways more like what a community banker in the 1950s would have done than it is like the process for, say, an American getting a mortgage to buy a house in the U.S. today. We do look at numbers. We do look at credit scores and credit reports. Often that is not at all the most important thing we look at, because we have, some of our customers operate a cash business. They might braid hair at a salon, and they may have never had a mortgage in the U.S. They may have never taken out a car loan in the U.S. They may not even have a credit card in the U.S., which means their credit score, if you just look at the number, is really low, and is not the kind of thing that someone would normally take on as a credit risk. We dig a little bit deeper. We look at bank statements. We look at cash flow. We look at, on a consistent basis, how much cash you have left over at the end of the month, and is that going to be enough to cover this monthly payment that you're talking about taking on, and put you in a place where you're not going to get into trouble with that. Because it's like the worst thing for us is also the worst thing for our buyers. If we put somebody into a contract that they cannot keep up with, it's just bad all around. And so sometimes people will ask us, and they'll be anxious about, my credit score is not so great. And I'm like, I'll pay attention to what your credit score is. The number itself is less interesting to me than why the number is what it is. But really, at the end of the day, do you have the resources to cover this monthly payment that you're contemplating taking on? And if you do, great. And if you don't, well, let's find something that you can afford then, because, you might come to me with an 850 credit score, which looks good. But if you're trying to buy a house that's too big for your budget, it's not going to work. I don't care what your credit score is, right? And you might come to me with a 600 credit score and be perfectly capable of paying for what you're trying to get. And so we have to navigate that a little bit.
Yeah, and just to add to that, absolutely. In Ghana, they look at just the credit report. I mean, the credit score is something they don't look at. However, the other thing I wanted to mention was that outside of the credit report, that's, you have the salaried workers, and then you have the self-employed. So the self-employed, they will look at cash flow, bank statements, and require 3 years audited financial statements. So these are all things that, could be considered. So you could be self-employed as well.
That is good stuff. This has been such an interesting conversation that I took my eye off the clock, and we've only got about 15 minutes left. So I feel like we need to go through a lightning round here. I'm going to ask one more question about one piece of this that I hope we can sort of give some quick answers to, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what I should have asked you that I didn't. The question I have here, we're talking. All of us here are involved in building in a fairly structured, formal part of the economy. The reality is that much of the building that happens still today in Ghana and Guinea and Sierra Leone, Cameroon, and lots of places is not so much formal. It is still somebody finding somebody to get a piece of land for them, and then finding. Getting their cousin to hire somebody to put a wall around it or whatever. There's a lot of relatively informal construction happening, and people buying through that kind of process. And some of this happens in the context of development that's going on without much planning, or without any planning. And so what that sometimes leads to is problems that could be avoided with better planning. And I'm thinking particularly of sort of recent flooding that you've seen in some parts of Accra, in areas where people have built really quickly and not designed in solutions for runoff during the rainy season and things like that. So the question here is about how as people are sort of coming into this from the outside, what are some of the things that you get with a more sort of formally structured approach, Jobomax is building in this master plan community called Apollonia City. We have not done the infrastructure there. There's a larger global developer that has planned all of that stuff, the sewer systems and the water and the electric and the roads and the planning for the runoff and all that kind of stuff. In other places where we build, we're doing that ourselves. We're making sure that when we do the landscaping in a courtyard, we're not paving over the entire courtyard. We're building in sort of permeable parts of it where water can settle in during the rainy season and not have everything just flowing out into the street as soon as it starts to rain. So Hanna, how do you advise people as they're looking at parts of town or areas where development is going on? What kind of cautions would you give people about making sure that they're buying into a place where it's not just someone thinking about the interior finishes on this one apartment, but also there's been some development thinking and planning around what's it actually going to be like to live in this area when the rains come? What's it actually going to be like to live here, when whatever other problems might come up?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. It's very timely now with all the flooding and the rainy season in Ghana. But I think essentially, I would say there are three sides to that coin, right? So the first is from the developer. One of the things you need to require of them is a building permit. Do they have a building permit to be able to build in that area? That is with the assumption that they receive that building permit after an assessment was done, that area is a viable area to build, right? So they need the building permit there. You can also request the layout from the developer to understand, the entire scope of the development. And then there's the local assembly. The local assembly, you can actually request the layout of that particular region, and it marks all the flood zone areas, and so people don't do that because they don't know to do that. But even with that, you can just hire a licensed surveyor. A licensed surveyor will show you all the areas that are marked flood prone areas, the areas where they are waterways where you're not supposed to be building, etc. Because, the reality on the ground is that people are obtaining building permits illegally. That's the reality. But if you want to do your due diligence and ensure that was obtained, in the right manner, hire a licensed surveyor. And something that a surveyor told me as well, to inform our clients that as a buyer beware, you could do your own due diligence. One of the things is to go there during the rainy season, and see for yourself. But two things. He said that when you are walking in these areas, for example, you want to buy land somewhere, you're wearing boots, and is the land a bit soggy? Does it sink in as you're walking through? That's one indication it's flood prone. Another is there's a type of plant that only grows in flooded areas, waterlogged areas. And if you see those plants in existence, it means that is a waterlogged area. So there's buyer beware. There's also hiring a local surveyor. There's making sure that the developer has the whole infrastructure, the whole layout, the drainage systems in place, the building permit, that sort of thing. And if you do all those things, then I believe you should be getting a home that is not in a flood prone area.
Great.
And then flood insurance. Get flood insurance if you really want the home and it's in a flood zone. Just get flood insurance. But they may not insure it. So
which they're not even selling in some places here in the U.S. now because they know it's got flood. But listen, this has been so interesting, and I'm so grateful to both of you for making yourselves available. Before we close it out, I'm just going to ask you, Hanna, last words of wisdom, things you would have said if I'd asked you about that you didn't get a chance to say, and a quick note on how people can find eWells.
Well, thank you so much. I think you've asked all the significant questions, and I just want to reiterate that it's so important to do your due diligence. Do your due diligence. find out what the home buying process is, get educated about it prior to making any sort of acquisition. And, it's all about building generational wealth through real estate, one house at a time. And we are Ewell's Realty and Consultancy. You can find us on all the social media platforms at Ewell's Realty, and our website is ewellsconsult.com. So thank you so much to Jobomax. Thank you, Bob and Marisa.
Thank you, Hanna. And Marisa, last words of wisdom, and how can people find you?
Yeah, I think one thing I just want to kind of just go remind everybody about the coming home and life in Accra, life in Ghana, especially from outside. We have all these ideas. Come find out for yourself. Come here, do a trip. If you want to do it or you're interested, maybe not, listen to people that have been here, or, not all the things we hear in the news or the media, just come and see for yourself, and make that first step. Come see and come feel it. And yes, I'm with Jobomax Homes. So again, you can find us on all social medias, Jobomax Homes, even including our YouTube channel as well. And jobomaxhomes.com will get you to me or anyone else on the sales team. We are global, so 24/7. Someone's probably online. So, yeah.
Just to clarify.
And thank you, Bob.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And Anna.
just to clarify, it's jobomax.com is the URL, right? And we do have homes, but maybe we should get the Jobomax Homes URL too. Well, thank you both.
Yes.
Thank you both. I feel like we could have talked for another hour, but I know I'm trying to respect your schedules because I know you have other things to go on to. So thank you so much for coming, and thanks to our listeners. Please check out Ewell's. They're doing good work in Ghana. And if you want a home there and you don't like what Jobomax is building, they can point you to something that you will like. So thank you both. And we'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Thank you.